Steph, I know you were rocking some very cool SOAR kit at Two Oceans recently, which I'm assuming now is your lucky race kit. But talk to me a little bit about why you chose to race in SOAR.
I just love the quality of SOAR kit. It's so light and breathable that you forget you're wearing it, which when you're racing is very important because it's one less distraction and you want to be feeling your best on race day. My favourite item though has to be the marathon shorts. There are so many places that you can store your gels and other items without it feeling bulky. They're just so comfortable to do those long runs in. There's a huge range of performance kit in really cool colours and designs that you can check out at soarrunning.com. For some spring training motivation, SOAR are rewarding you for hard-earned personal bests whilst wearing a SOAR race vest. Run a verified PB between the 1st of March and the 31st of May and get £50 SOAR credit. Head to the show notes for details.
Thank you to SOAR for sponsoring this episode.
I quit an 80k race at about 50k because I convinced myself that physically I wasn't capable of finishing it. I didn't realise that my brain and body were connected and it would affect my performance. And it feels like the missing jigsaw piece in my ultra running journey. So for the rest of that race, I just kept on repeating, I'm so grateful to Mother Earth and Father Air that I get to do this. And that's how I finished my race.
Now, we talk a lot on the show about the power of mindset and how we both utilise sports psychology coaching to help with our training and racing. So today, we are super excited to be joined by Kaz Williams, a performance psychologist, running coach, speaker, and ultra runner.
Kaz is founder of Mettle, whose purpose is to provide you with training plans, mental strategies, and support to help you be the best trail and ultra runner you can be. Kaz has an impressive running CV of her own, having completed multiple ultra marathons, including one loop of the Barkley Marathons and Badwater.
Steph, I'm so excited for this episode because I feel like we talk so much about the power of sports psychology, but it's going to be great to delve into it with an expert on the show today and just share so many more tips and tricks with our listeners, because I bet there are so many people out there who train their bodies so hard but have actually never really tapped into using a sports psychologist or putting as much effort into training their minds.
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually, because getting a training plan to physically train our bodies is so accessible, whereas I do find it might be a bit harder to find the support you need to train your mind as well. So having Kaz here will just be so useful for so many people.
And we're going to be getting a bit of personal advice with some things that we individually struggle with in training.
Yeah.
The fact that we regularly work with a sports psychologist, of course, we still have our challenges, many challenges that come up on a day-to-day basis. So one thing I'm going to be asking Kaz about today is having confidence in my training and ability. Now, I have a brilliant coach who really knows what he's doing, so I completely trust what he gives me. But what I often find myself doing is thinking I need to be doing more, whether that's more in sessions, more mileage, more strength and conditioning. I kind of always go back to this unhelpful belief that more is more, which, as we know, is not necessarily true.
Yeah, I think that's a really common one though, because it's so easy to compare what you're doing to other people. But as you said, we've had guests on this show that are amazing athletes and they might do way less mileage than you do and it's working for them. So it's having the confidence that believing that what you're doing is the right thing for you and that's making you the best athlete you can be. One of the things that I want to ask Kaz about is recently now I've been doing some faster sessions that I'm perhaps not as used to anymore, but I used to do a lot a few years ago, is kind of comparing my splits now to what I used to do back then, because those were days where I was training for shorter races. Now I train for marathons and ultras. So it's not necessarily relevant that I'm comparing those times, but it's only natural that you know in the back of your mind, oh, I used to be able to run this for my 400 reps and now I can't hit those times. And I have to trust that, you know, over the next few weeks that I will adapt and I can get faster. It's still there, but also not worrying because I'm not training for the same thing anymore.
I think it would be really interesting to hear what Kaz has to say on that, because when you're saying that to me, I'm thinking, well, of course you can't, because you've only just started this training block. And as you say, you've been training for an ultra. So if you could suddenly run the paces that you used to run when you were only training on the track for 5K, that would kind of be ridiculous. Let's hear what Kaz has to say. Shall we crack on with the show?
Let's do it.
Kaz, thanks so much for joining us today. As Steph and I have been saying, we are such a big fan of using sports psychology sessions to help with our training. So we've been so excited to have you on the show to share your wisdom. But the first question we'd like to ask you is one we ask all our guests, which is, what is your why for running?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me here. I've been super excited to meet you both. The why for my running. So I think that falls into two camps. There's the training side and just getting out and enjoying running, and then also the racing side. Running is incredibly powerful, and I think when we see and experience what we're capable of, like, we can't unsee it. And I think that raises lots more questions. So I love how it feels to run. I love the way running has allowed me to experience different landscapes, see beautiful places. And then also after that first 10 to 20 minutes, the kind of chatter in my head quietens down. And I think it's a great way to get perspective. And it might be a session where I'm bringing focus to my form, or it might be just one that I'm incredibly present in, and it feels like a very soulful run. But then on the racing side, for me, I race to challenge myself, to see what I'm capable of, and to see how far I can go. I believe that we're capable. If we put our mind to anything, we can achieve it. We are unlimited, but it's if we want it bad enough.
I love that. You know what? I had a session this morning, and the targets my coach set me, I was like, how am I going to hit it? And I came back to a very similar why, which is part of my why for running is also to challenge my body and just see how far I can push myself. And that's what I came back to when I saw these targets and thought, like, oh my God, how am I going to do it? Like, no, this is why I run. I do it to challenge myself and see if I can hit those targets. So instead of worrying about it, let's just like have fun with it and see if I can do it. And actually it went well. So
I was gonna say, how did it go? That's a little insight. Was it a good session?
It was, and we hit the targets, and I thought, God, I never thought I could do that. But I think a lot of it is just having that mindset of being like, well, let's see what we can do. Let's see what our bodies can do. And it is, you do always surprise yourself. So I love that.
Okay, so what do we need to know about your personal journey with running to understand why you wanted to practice sports psychology in the first place?
Okay, so I paint the picture of a sunny, it was a June afternoon. I'm sitting on a curbside and next to an aid station, and I'm waiting for my boyfriend to pick me up with my number cut. I quit an 80k race at about 50k because I convinced myself that physically I wasn't capable of finishing it. And I'd been telling this story on a loop for about 10k. You're not going to be able to finish this. This is rubbish, like this. Let's get to the next aid station. Came off the mountain. It's a story that I was practicing as well. I think maybe I'll come on to that, but I was practicing this story because I knew it was the story that I was going to tell my boyfriend, and it was a story that I was going to tell anyone else that asked. I hadn't trained enough. I wasn't good enough to finish. Came off the mountain, went straight into the aid station, walked up to the nearest volunteer and said, I quit. Like this. And I think it's not their job to kind of keep you in the race, but I think she went, are you sure? Like, I'm probably say, are you sure? And I was like, yes. And she went, phew, and that was it, cut. So I kind of walked out of there, sat on the curbside. And I just went, there's nothing wrong with me, really. It's my mental game that had let me down. I had done that race the previous year, and I had such a fabulous experience. It's one in Chamonix that actually just follows the valley. So you're up and down the mountains, you go to the furthest end of Valocine, you come back round, and you start and finish in Chamonix Town Centre. And I was, every point I got to, second time I was doing it, I was like, I'm 10 minutes behind, I'm 20 minutes, but my time was slipping. And this is where I concocted this story. It's like, well, I'm just rubbish. My self-talk was so negative and it was just spiraling out of control. And I think it was at that point that I realised that I needed to take action. I sat there and questioned it, I knew that like the next morning I was like, I'm absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with me. And so I had heard a podcast with Dr. Michael Gervais, who's a sports psychologist in the US, and he had a short course on high performance mindset training. So I did that. Fell in love with psychology. I've always been interested in it and how we can enable ourselves to have incredible successes, but we can also sabotage ourselves as well. And that's what I'd done on that particular race. But I didn't even give myself a minute either in the aid station, and I share that story now with athletes because if they're going into a race that they are feeling slightly nervous or slightly worried about, I said, if you reach that point where you think, well, that's it, I'm going to quit. If you're not on a cutoff, then give yourself some time. Take a moment, take a breath. If you can, and I always say, if you can walk to the food station, go and eat something, you can walk out to the aid station as well. And then give yourself 10 minutes the other side of the aid station. And if you're still moving, carry on until the next one. And I didn't have that as a strategy in my race. So after doing the short course with Dr. Michael Gervais, I then found an online sports psychology course, which I completed and absolutely loved.
Oh, amazing. And you know what? I think so many of our listeners are going to be able to relate to this. So I'm really excited to get into this episode more and get your insights, because I think it's just so common that everyone's dropped out of a race at least once. And more likely than not, the reason has been not a physical one where you're injured or you're too ill to carry on. There's the mindset issue where you just suddenly, I've had it before, where suddenly you just stopped and you're kind of like, what's happened? Like your brain's just decided, okay, now's the time to stop. And before you know it, you're not running anymore and you've dropped out of the race. And you don't really know why until you can delve into it a bit more. So really excited to kind of get more of your insight into why that happens and how we can prevent it, because definitely think it's very common.
Yeah, and I think that with this particular race, it was an ultra, and there's perhaps the bigger windows that you have got chance to turn a race around effectively. But I think which is what we'll come on to, it's having those tools there ready and not just expecting them to show up when you're in a stressful situation. Go, okay, I've done all my amazing training. I've got my nutrition dialed. I've got my hydration dialed. Everything's sorted. Have I done, what training have I done on my mental game? And there's a lot of people that still haven't yet started that journey.
Steph made such a good point there that a lot of the time it is, and as you say, it's our minds that get the better of us. I always think it's going to be your mind gives up quicker than your body does. Mm-hmm. But it can really kind of translate into physical effects. There's so many times that you think you're kind of feeling something and actually it is just your mind playing tricks on us. So can you just tell us a bit about how our minds and bodies are linked?
It is a great question, because I suppose there'll be, for each of us individually, when we're racing, it could hit us at different points as well. So I think the key thing that we need to make sure that we, first of all, is recognise and have awareness around it and bring it into our training. Because I had this I'm working with an athlete at the moment who has gone from, over just a series of a few sessions, extreme anxiety and worry and panic about a race, to then beautifully saying, I didn't realise that my brain and body were connected and it would affect my performance. And it feels like the missing jigsaw piece in my ultra running journey. And so whereas words were anxious and anxiety, we've kind of I can see the relief in this athlete, and she's so excited now. But turning that excited and that nervousness is because she wants to perform really well. She always wanted to perform really well, but it's that recognition of no, the training we've done, the things that she's been putting in over the last 6 to 8 weeks in training is now giving her the confidence. And we talk about confidence. Confidence comes in so many different shapes and forms, and how we build it. It's not here, do this, and you'll be confident and have the perfect race. So I think by tying in our mind into our training, I think that's where the missing pieces are for a lot of athletes.
And it sounds like she almost realised that her mindset can change, which I think is such an important piece. It's realising you're not stuck with what you've got. Yeah. And it sounds like the same applied for you in that ultra. You realised, okay, I don't have to do this again. I don't have to be in this position where my brain stops me. Yeah. But how much of our minds can we change? And how much is kind of genetically fixed and what we're born with?
So I suppose we could talk about that as personal growth as well. So by recognising growth is possible, that we can change, it's thinking of it as a journey, not a single event. So it's not I've suddenly changed, therefore all my performances are going to be. I've put in the work, so therefore I expect to have, strong finishes or be successful, whatever success is defined by the athlete. It actually takes commitment to do the work. And I think there can be a nod to it. Oh, well, I've done some hard stuff, or I've trained really hard. But you actually have to set time aside as if you were, I don't know whether you use whatever training platform you use, but I use Training Peaks with my athletes. If I put in a block saying, 20 minutes on thinking about your race, or all the what ifs with your race, if you're traveling, make sure it's simple stuff. The more prepared we are, that's mental toughness sort of in disguise, because the energy that we save by doing things when we're on a lovely comfy couch and we're not in a stressful situation, we could sit here now and we could talk about your ultra, Steph, and we can talk about Paris for you, and we can sit here because it's nice and calm and all the things that could go wrong or go well, and we put the energy to it now and go, the what ifs, what if that happens? Well, this is what I'm going to do. So you come up with that plan of action. And I think that's where people put so much focus on buying the right kit and the shoes and everything, that bit of time that instead of researching shoes, they could then research, how am I going to actually bring my mental game, how am I going to make my mental game ready for this scenario?
Yeah, that's such a good idea in putting it like a training plan.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of listeners will train their physical bodies hard and they'll follow a training plan for physical running. Mm-hmm. And those training plans are very readily available online as well.
Yeah.
But a lot of performance comes down to your mental game. And I doubt everyone that listens is focusing on that. So for those people that haven't accessed tools to work on their mindset, where do we start with this? What are some simple things that people can implement to, overcome race nerves or just general work stress in life and tough training sessions? Where do we begin?
So I think if we take that commitment to an athlete, recognizing that they want to change, it's sometimes asking the tough questions as well. Is what I'm thinking truth? Is it 100% real? Or have I created a story, which is what I was doing. I was creating a story. Other athletes have shared with me, this is a buddy a couple of years ago, he'd convinced himself he had a major knee injury, pulled out of a race. The next day he was like, I'm absolutely fine, but in his head, like you said, that pain, he created that pain in his knee. There's also finding out what is perhaps, or what has stopped you making change in the past, what has been perhaps a limiting factor. And sometimes it can be, say, about asking the tough questions and having honest conversations with ourselves. It could be that we're fear of change, that we're fear of failure, of taking the risks, to see that we feel comfortable. Are we going to step outside of our comfort zone? And how does that feel? And then sometimes it could be limited self-awareness. And I think this is a big one, because we know ourselves so well in our current lives, I suppose. When was the last time we really challenged some of the things that we did or the thoughts that we had? Because they've become so autopilot. And that's, sometimes we have a tough session and we can beat ourselves up so much about that and going, is that, and there's a lovely phrase, is it healing or help? Is it hurting or healing me? And in that case, usually you might have had that session this morning, Rose, but if you hadn't gone well, would you be a bit like, well, that didn't. And so even having the physical experience, you're then beating yourself up mentally as well. Was if you did a bit of a reframe, you could have said, hey, well, that was a tough session. I've got some space there to do some learning, some growth, practice, whatever skill it was. So I think we can ask the tough questions is a good starting point. But if we were to say one simple thing that somebody could start with is just listening to their inner critic. What is our inner voice telling us? And a bit like saying when we're preparing, say, for a race or something, we do it on our sofa, plan everything out, all the eventualities. Listening to our self-talk on a day-to-day basis when we're in the shower, when we're preparing dinner, when we're walking to work, what are the sorts of things we're saying to ourselves? Journaling, so making a note of that is a really good way to do it, to start. And you can go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize like negative spirals were going on. And it could be the smallest things. It could be about the work that you're going to be, whether you walk into work and what you've got to do that day. But it's starting to recognize how you talk to yourself, because we can be, in every moment of every day, we can be our own coach. We can be a really good coach. We can be really supportive, encouraging, as we would with a friend. Hey, that was a great session this morning, Or we can be a really poor coach and, actually negatively affect how we're actually trying to improve. So I think did you watch the Ted Lasso series?
I love it.
So imagine, and we love Nate because Nate turned his story around. But, if you had Ted Lasso being your supportive coach in your head, supportive, encouraging, you know exactly what he's going to say to you. When Nate fell into the dark side and was kind of like trying to talk the way that he was talking to the players, that we felt that on screen. We felt how he was speaking bad to Colin, if I'm remembering names correctly. But, and that gives us a bit of a kind of, I don't know, it feels uncomfortable. So if you think of, I suppose one of the easiest questions is, would you say that to a friend? Rose, would you say that to Steph? Steph, would you say that to Rose? And you probably go, God, I'd never say that to her,
Yeah.
So I think a starting point is really listening to what you say to yourself.
That's such a good point. And it's one that my sports psychologist always comes back to me with, because I'm a harsh critic of myself, and I'll say things and then she said, imagine if you said that to a friend, or a friend said that to you, like, what would you think? And I think, well, that'd be a horrible and probably quite ridiculous thing to say. If a session goes well, I'm beating myself up, and it's like, do you think that's helpful? And of course, when you reflect on it, it's like, well, of course it's not. But you're right, it's so easy to get caught up in that mindset. And for some reason, when we're saying that to ourselves, it's kind of acceptable, but it's not helpful.
No. And it's important to remember that we're not, so we have a positive mindset, a negative mindset, and then we have like that kind of flow state where we're not really thinking, and it's the beautiful moment we try and get to in our sports. And then sometimes there'll be moments you're like, what was I thinking about? Because you're so present, you're so in the moment. And whatever, whether you're on a trail or on a road race, you really are just, you're aware of yourself, but you're just, we talk about being just present in almost like a no space. But you can't stop. The worst thing you can do is say, oh, that's a negative, stop thinking negative thoughts, because then that's the kind of almost like the double negative. And the more you say, hey, don't think of a pink elephant in the corner of the room, the first thing you're going to do is think of the pink elephant in the room. And so we want to move between the flow and accept that it's a continuous movement. We move from positive to negative to flow. Ultimately, we want to stay longer in flow, but it's not preventing the negative, it's bringing awareness to it as quick as we can, and then trying to replace it, distract it with some of the mental toughness tools that I'm sure you've both been working on. So
yeah, I think the key word you just said was awareness, because the thing for me has definitely been being aware of why I think the things I do when they are negative, and just understanding, okay, why are you saying this about yourself? Or during a rep when it's tough, like, why is that voice saying that to you? And just listening to it, understanding it, and then trying to kind of flip it on its head and think of the rational way to think about that.
Yeah.
And I think the more and more that I practice thinking rationally about these things, the quicker the rational brain kind of comes to the front when a negative thought comes in. So it definitely takes practice and kind of repeating that cycle over and over to be able to, like you said, distract yourself from some of those negative thoughts.
And that's why doing it in comfortable, not say threatening, that's wrong, but non-high stress situations. So you're walking right around your home, or you're going like, hey, today's been a great day. You bring all the positives to mind. You're having that chat with yourself. That session went really well. And before you know it, that habit, so our successes and our greatness comes from our habits, our routines, our structure, our consistency. If we start talking to ourselves kindly, if we're kind to ourselves physically, we do all the right stuff. We put great food in our bodies. We stay hydrated. We make sure we have the right amount of sleep to support all the training, and then we're bashing our heads with the club when our self-talk is negative. So the more we can support that, bring it all together, that jigsaw piece, that's when that's when the magic can happen. Really, it can go from seeing huge gains in performance as well. When somebody's running with joy, that's not saying they're not hurting. I mean, my goodness, both of you, I'm sure, know what that pain feels like when you're the paces you're running, but it's almost with like, I can do this. And that's, again, I can do this. It's the positive, it's not like, oh my God, I'm not keeping it. It's you're continuously using positive language. And the more you can do that, the better the performance is.
It's time to thank our sponsor for this episode, Veloforte.
Now, as our listeners will know by now, we are both big fans of using the Veloforte products in our training. And I have to say, Steph, I had a really hard session today. And all I could think about in those last couple of reps was having a malto shake at the end. The cold cinnamon and vanilla shake at the end of a hard session just hits differently.
Oh, it tastes so good, doesn't it? I've been absolutely loving the energy chews. They're a great alternative to gels, and I've been using them on those longer runs, especially in my training for Two Oceans. They came in very handy and they're so delicious. I love the apple and cinnamon flavour.
And the best bit is, because Veloforte uses only real food ingredients and nothing artificial, you can trust what you're putting in your body, and it digests so much better to synthetic alternatives.
And you can understand every ingredient on the back, which is not always the case with these types of products.
Thanks to Veloforte for supporting this podcast. And if you would like 30% off the Veloforte products, head to veloforte.com and use the code 5miles at checkout. And I think the prep is such a key part, and one that we use particularly in races. We both plan exactly what we're going to think about at different stages of the race, because as you said, doing it in a low stress environment, you can think clearly and you can plan. In a race, you don't have that ability to rationally think, okay, what am I going to think about now? Yeah. And that's how the negative thoughts come in, and then you have to deal with them in that high stress environment. From my personal experience, planning what I'm going to think about in a race is so crucial, because especially in a marathon, negative thoughts are going to creep in. It's that acceptance of, yep, they're going to come at me, but I have this tool to deal with it. I'm going to be able to chuck that thought out and stick to my plan of what I'm going to think about.
Yeah.
And just instantly replace it and switch that mindset, get back into that flow state where I'm just focusing on form or smiling at people or whatever it is that I've committed to thinking about in that section.
Smiling is a strategy. It's like one of the best strategies. It's like the energy that it brings, it's that distraction. But what you're saying about planning, and I'm sure this is, other people talk about, you have your armory of tools, and you build them up, and you also learn, that one didn't work this time for whatever reason, because the same things won't work on every race, and it's accepting that. You mentioned acceptance. It's accepting that, okay, maybe I need to try another one. And so through trying them out in training, you go, imagine Lara Croft's belt, okay, we've got like all sorts of things going on in this belt, and we can pull one out and we go, okay, I'm going to try the positive self-talk, or I'm going to try, there's this favourite joke I've got, or I'm just going to smile at every single person I see. And, at one point, all of a sudden, those negative thoughts, you go, I've moved into the positive space, I'm feeling strong in my form. You'll see people's physically, externally change, because they're now running that little bit lighter, or they've gone through a phase. And with the ultra running, it's staying different, but I always say, I can't tell you whether your pain cave will last 2 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 hours, 10 hours, but I promise you'll get through it. And I think that's the ability to be in that pain and then go, it's okay, I'm going to keep deploying these tools, I'm going to try this. That doesn't work. And you almost work through them until you find that moment where you come out the other side and you go, this race is amazing, I'm loving it. So yeah, it's very different. It's being able to draw on them is a skill in itself, and that's where it comes through the training.
I think so often we focus on being in that pain cave and the suffering, and focus less on how it feels when we come out, and actually just how good it can feel as well. Yeah. So I think that's such a crucial bit. But despite all our work that we do with our sports psychologists, of course, we still have regular challenges in our sessions, races, with various mindset issues that we come across. So we've got a couple here that we want to get your advice on. A big one for me is confidence. I always go back to thinking I need to do more. And I think it hasn't just been since I've been pro. I've kind of always had this ingrained, unhelpful belief that more is more. I'm not doing as much as everyone else, and I have to work harder than everyone else to get to the same place. I mean, I try so many different strategies to work on this, but it's something that always kind of comes back. So, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, whether that's in training or just in day-to-day life and challenging situations at work, thinking, got to work harder to get to the next promotion or whatever it is. I'm sure it's something you come across a lot. What do you say to athletes who come to you with this kind of thing?
If we separated confidence and kind of comparison, because your confidence, I think it's, so if generally, if people are recording their training, recording their successes, that they're consistent in their training, it has been for let's go weeks, months, years to reach a point. I think a key thing is always to look back on your successes, and then, but not, we're often, if we have a success, we're very too quick to go, okay, that was great, I did really well, and on to the next thing. I think it's really important personally, and it doesn't have to be like you sharing it with everyone else. It's really like sits with you to say, hey, I did really well, what went well, and really analyze that, and how did I reach that point? Where was my confidence sitting? What preparation had I done? So we talk about that, setting time aside to really analyze the training or the leading up to it, because we know that the Rose and the Steph of right now, you're going to be thanking you for the training that you're doing now in about 2 months, 3 months, whatever, whenever your next race are. So you're going to be thanking them, but it's recognizing it in the moment as well. So I think looking back over all your training is a really important one. But remind yourself of, and it's noting all the challenges that you've overcome. So whether you've had a difficult race, why was it difficult, and what did you do after it? What lessons did you learn? So we've mentioned awareness, and then it's accepting of those scenarios and then moving on from them. And also then it could be one of the audits I always ask an athlete to do is their strengths audit, so that you really know what you're strong at, what you're great at. I'm not saying you're not going to have an area that you want to work on, and we'll continue to work on that. But when you know what your superpower is, and that gives you the opportunity. This isn't about being humble. This is like saying, I am great when it comes to mile 10 in a marathon, and I can put the, or it's, if it was an ultra runner doing a mountain race, it might be, I can power up, give me a mountain after a mountain after a mountain, and I can run them, but it's bringing that awareness, because when you're in that, and you do that in training, then when you're in the racing situation and you might be struggling, you draw on that, you lean on that, and you sit, and this is where all the small bits of confidence, they're like building blocks to build your confidence up. Comparison is challenging, because comparison, we're not in control of anyone else, we're in control of what we can be in control of. And I think focusing on your process, focusing on your journey is really important.
Do you think it's more common now, I guess, with social media? You see how other people train, and you can, and generally people that post on social media, they're posting the highlights as well. So when they're really fit and everything's going really well, and it can be really easy to think, okay, they're doing this and it's going well for them, should I be doing that? Do you think it's more common these days compared to, say, 20 years ago when you didn't really know what anyone else was doing?
It's so hard not to make those, because it's only natural to make those assumptions, to look at times or splits or stories on social and go, well, I haven't run that, whatever the volume is that week, and then people will start, I suppose some athletes might share the types of sessions that they're doing. They go, well, I'm doing 11, 12, 13 sessions, double days, I'm throwing in this, I'm doing, and you're like, and then you look at your plan and you're not doing that. I think this is where it takes, when we talk about it takes patience and confidence to trust you on your path. And I think deep down, and you will know that, your coach can't do the training or motivate you. That has to come from you. They can support you in every way. But I think at some point you go, this is right for me. This is the sweet spot for my training. And I think we all know that being overtrained on a start line is worse than being just slightly under, because you're so excited to perform then, and you're excited for the challenge to see what you can do. So I think that comparison is just so hard. A runner at the weekend, Ruth Croft, who won a race, she said it's so many races, there's so many unknowns, and you don't know, you could be at your best, but it still doesn't come off in the day. But then when the stars, when the planets align and you have this perfect performance, she said all the other races lead up to that one. And I think it's recognizing all the tough times, you know, the classic, you get knocked down, you get back up, whether it's 8, 9, 10 times, but it's how you keep turning up, keep putting in the work. I think that's the important part.
It's so hard in elite sport because those perfect races, they're so few and far between, and you do so much work and you have so many times that aren't as great just to get that one sweet race. But when it happens, it's incredible. But it is few and far between. And I think you're right, Steph. From social media, you see the highlights and you think it's happening all the time. The reality is, like, most of it is a grind.
Yeah.
And then you just have that one day where you're flying, but that's the day that goes on social media.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard the quote, I think, was it Des Linden's coach that shared with her, training is in thirds. So have you heard this? So a third of training is going to be pretty rubbish. A third of training is going to be just about okay. And then a third is going to be amazing. So if you work on that basis, that 2/3 of your training and 2/3 of everything is the grind, like you said, it's just about okay. And then you can apply that to races, you know, but it's that 1/3 that you just go, that was amazing. I felt like I was flying today. So I think that puts that perspective on it, because I think Des Linden had raced Boston so many times before she got her first. Like, I can't remember the exact backstory, but, you know, she just said, I just had to keep showing up, keep doing the work. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so one that I struggle with at the moment, especially because, as you know, I've just done an ultra marathon and I've kind of had years of marathon training now. And it's been a long time since I properly trained on the speed work side of things. So I decided with my coach that this summer I'm going to go back to doing some shorter stuff just to get some speed in my legs. And that should hopefully also help me for the marathon distance and beyond. So I've gone back to doing some track sessions. And for me, it's been really hard to almost come to terms with the splits that I'm running now, because it's been a few years since I was training for 5Ks or even shorter distances than that. And I had a lot of speed in my legs then and I was used to it. So I'll be doing sessions now and I know exactly like the times I could run for these reps a few years ago. And I think, oh my gosh, I'm so unfit. But actually, it's quite irrelevant because I'm a different athlete now. Potentially overall a better athlete, more experienced, but it's still very hard to kind of process that when you are working hard in a session now, but you think, wow, I used to be so much faster. Am I just unfit? So, yeah.
I think we can, it's knowing that where we're at this precise moment in time. It's almost that, what's the phrase, you never step into the same river twice. So you'll never, you know, you won't be the same person, but that's not meaning you can't achieve the paces. And I think that's the difference. It's like you've gained so much more in other places, and your speed will come. It really, you know, it really will. And I think that comes down to your self-belief, your self-efficacy, and your confidence in that, because it's like energy. We achieve what we believe, you know. What's the Henry Ford quote? If you think you can't, you won't. If you think you can, you can. You know, you're right in that whichever way you think, you can achieve it. And I think one of the most common, I suppose, aspects that a lot of athletes come to me is that they've trained so hard, but their self-belief, you know, takes a lot more work, and that they hadn't recognised that was perhaps a limiting factor in their actual times. So I think believing now that you can do that and having the confidence, it'll take the work. I can't say you can sit on the sofa and go, I believe I'm going to run faster without doing the work, but you know, that is in your control.
Yeah, and I also think for me, the reason I'm doing it is I really don't enjoy track sessions, and it's a different type of pain. I like the long sessions where you're kind of grinding it out. I enjoy that pain, but the sort of lactic short distance pain is totally different. And so for me, I know I need to do the things I don't enjoy to also be a better athlete.
Yeah.
And so just kind of showing up every week, knowing I'm not really looking forward to this, but I need to tick it off. And hopefully over the next few weeks, then you start seeing the progress.
Yeah, and think about the mental toughness you're kind of banking by doing those sessions. Because when you've got that sick feeling in your stomach and you're pushing hard, and then you're on your next start race line in a couple of months, whatever, you'll go, oh my God, that session, but I did it. You did it. And then you're going to be, you know, you'll be improving from there on. So I think all the things you're doing now, it's however you're recording it, make that note, just go, that was tough, but I did it. This is what I achieved today. So it's putting that, you're like, I did that session, I didn't avoid it, I suppose is a good way to look at
that's
it.
very helpful.
You mentioned the self-belief aspect of as being one of the most common things people come to you with. But what are the other things that you see most frequently that people struggle with? And what tools and strategies do you suggest they try using to overcome those challenges?
That's a great question. I think sometimes I would use the visualization tool, because I think a lot of the athletes don't see themselves sometimes even, I'm going to say finishing, but achieving the results of all the effort that they've put in training. And I think asking them to bring to life their race, that's a really good one as well. So it's like, so how is it going to feel when you're standing at the start line? And it's like, well, I'm on a taper week. I'm going, no, that's not what you're feeling. You've just done a taper week leading to race. So it's trying to really, bring everything that an athlete's been training towards, to bring what the goal, their main goal is, to life. And I think sometimes that can be, as you talked about breaking down your mental toughness thoughts in your race in advance, it's doing that as well, because referencing ultras, but a lot of athletes may not have run through the night before. So for them, it's this massive unknown. It's like, you run in winter in the dark. Okay, this is exactly the same thing at 5 o'clock at night when it's dark on a December evening. It's exactly the same as 2 o'clock in the morning when you're running in the dark. So it's trying to sometimes demystify things for people so that they're not expending all this energy. So say, for example, they start their race at 6 or 7 in the morning. They're dreading the night session. But like we've chatted about that, we've preempted it. So it's taking things that people are stressing about pre-race and trying to help them address them. So it could be the smallest of things, like we talk about mountain runnings, but some people maybe never go for a pee in the mountains. They're going like, what if I'm desperate for a pee and I've got like 500 runners behind me? So some of those small things can create massive problems for somebody going into a race. I use the pee one, but there's lots of other things.
And what are can you give us some other kind of go-to strategies that you help people with? So you've mentioned there, first of all, noticing, really good one, just noticing those negative thoughts, overcoming them.
Yep.
What about like pre-race and in the race, some things that you find really help people?
So we mentioned the self-talk. I think that's really powerful. If on a day-to-day basis our self-talk is positive, that will transfer into our racing scenario. That's habit and that's routine. The visualization work is one of the biggest ones that I suppose I lean on pre-race, particularly if I'm traveling and I won't ever have chance to get on the course. That's a really big one. So I really try and imagine, and you have to imagine yourself finishing a race, and you bring it to life in a really vivid, technicolor way. And you use your senses as well. Sometimes if we have rehab work, we might go, I've done 8 reps, done my rehab work, and you kind of like try and rush through it as quick as possible. You can't do that with you can't do it with rehab, but if people try and say, I've done some visualization, I can see myself at the finish, and I'll go, describe it to me. Who's going to be there? What time of day is it going to be? Is it going to be hot, cold? What are you wearing? How are you going to feel? Are you going to be like, are you hungry, tired, crawling, walking, running? What's your punch? How are you going to cross that finish line? Are you going to jump up and punch the air? So really ask athletes to bring and put the time to it. Again, it goes back to the time, because the more you can bring it to life when you're actually in the scenario, in that race, you kind of go, I wondered what 50K was going to be like when I reached that point. And then when we're in the race, you only think about the next aid station, the next aid station. You don't focus then on the finish line. You focus on the finish line pre-race when you're doing all the visualization work. And just to say, a really good time to do visualization work is as you're, perhaps you've just switched the light off to go to bed. It's like 2 or 3 minutes when you're really calm. And research has shown it doesn't need to be more than 2 or 3 minutes. You just replay a scenario. So an athlete who's nervous about running at dark, I'll go, hey, how exciting is it going to be? Get your head torch on, and like, they've got to imagine getting that out of their bag and putting their head torch on, and do it in like almost slow-mo. So it's that visualization work. And you could be, that's for any type of race. I'm just using an ultra as an example. But those few minutes before we go to sleep, are really important because they help us. It's a creative space as well, and we can connect with it a lot easier than if we're trying to make a cup of tea at the same time or doing two things at once. And so that visualization, but then when we're in the race, it is point to point to point. If you start focusing on the finish that feels like a million miles away, then it's going to have a negative effect. So I said visualization, mantras. I love my mantras. So that's a really power. I'll have a mantra either for a specific race, or I'll have one for the season. And it usually comes organically. It might be something I've heard or something that really like fits well, that I connect with it really well. And I know that I might have to say it a million times. So that's really important. And also, we said about smiling. I think laughing at yourself sometimes as well, like trying to find something where you go, well, I did sign up for this. This is what I've trained for. This is, I want to see how I perform. And yeah, so those are a couple.
Yeah, that visualization one, I think, helped me so much at Two Oceans, because you mentioned the point of traveling. So if you haven't seen the course before and you don't know it, and the race being in Cape Town, even though I'd been there before, I hadn't done the course. And what helped me so much was I knew quite a few people that had done it before, and they really broke down every single section of the race to me, so much so that I could picture it all. And the race started in the dark as well, so I kind of pictured that first stretch being in the dark, and nothing came as a surprise during it. And again, not thinking about the finish line during the race, just having each section. And yeah, the race was very broken up, which really helped me mentally during it, because I wasn't on the start line thinking I've got 35 miles to run here. It was like, okay, let's get through this first stretch. It's going to be dark, then the sun will come up, then there's a hill, and you could kind of break it down that way, which was just so helpful.
That's really good. And I think that research element, speaking to people who know, because people that you trust as well, that will give you kind of an honest perspective of it. I think even knowing, at your podcast, when you were talking about it, you dialing in your nutrition, you knew what you were going to be having. Yeah. That 20 to 30 minute head to toe check-in that we do, that breaks up even the hour, whichever hour we're in, or with you're looking for, you go, okay, so now, 20 minutes I'm going to be having something else to eat. Then I'm going to reach another aid station, or then I've clocked the 20K or 30K. And I think I loved what you said in the podcast when you didn't really acknowledge the marathon distance, because it was about the ultra distance.
Yeah.
And because that's what you were running. And I think even that in itself shows, you brought awareness to that in that moment, which is really good.
Thank you.
So what do you do as a sports psychologist who advises people on all these incredible tactics that we can use? What does your daily mindset kind of exercise routine look like?
I have a race coming up in the summer where it's going to be in conditions that are new to me. Like it's a hot race. It's going to be very hot. So when I'm running in the snow right now, I'm trying to bring all my senses. I say now, a month or so to go, but I try and bring all my senses. I'm running in the snow. I've got all these layers of clothes on. I'm going to have to draw on this when I'm in this extremely hot environment to try and bring a sense of perspective to conditions that we can run in. And so for me, I'm going like, I'm going to be running in this crazy temperature, but I'm going to pretend that it's snowing. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm actually just telling my body it's okay, we can cope with this. We can cope with these temperatures because we train in different. It's almost like I'm not saying I've only ever trained in this scenario, so I'm not going to be able to run in it. I'm trying to play games with my mind just to say, hey, we can run in anywhere we want. If we want to run in the heat, we can run in the heat. If we want to run in the snow, we can run in the snow. Have you heard of David Goggins?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I'm a bit of a Goggins fan. And
Me too.
everyone will laugh because they go, God damn it, she's mentioned Goggins again. But he ran Badwater, I think probably 8 years ago now. But his approach has always been, you just do the work, you just get through it. You go into that sufferfest. You have to, put yourself in that situation to test yourself. I want to see what my body does. So for me now, that is front and center in my mind what it's going to be like in those temperatures. And I think the fact that I know that he's done it as well, I'm a bit like, I'm just going to my footsteps are going to be following in a path that I know that David Goggins has, and he's finished the race. So I have to believe I'm going to get to the end of that race and I'm going to survive the crazy temperatures. So a lot of my thinking at the moment is how I'm going to be feeling, how my body's going to be responding physically when I'm going to do the head-to-toe checks. Like I said, hey, feet, how you doing? You burning up? Like, have you, you melting yet? And knees, how you doing? Like, come on, we don't run on road, so this is a new experience. And I really work through my body. And then another 20 minutes later, I'll start from the head down and finish on my feet. So
what do you do when you do those checks and something hurts? Because what we have spoken about a lot is actually not checking in. And sometimes it can be a bit of a negative process if you think like, right, how am I feeling? And then I've often had it when I think, right, okay, I'm going to see how I'm feeling. And I find something negative. I'm like, oh, I think it's feeling harder than I want it to, or like my breathing's heavy or something hurts. So what do you do when your body comes back to you with, we're struggling here?
The thing that, again, we're trying to, in the moment, bring awareness to it. So you're going, okay, I've done this check and something's hurting. Let's say it's our leg. Okay, so, something on legs. Our legs are feeling really heavy. Why haven't I got the kind of like pop, the kind of that I'm expecting right now at this point in the race? And it's almost you can help. I mean, these are things that you find your own voice for this. But I would be like, hey, legs, we've got your back, like the core's strong, like I'm mentally on my game at the moment. You just take a bit of, we'll take a load off. You might just do something as simple as shrug your shoulders and drop them down to release some tension. You might, I don't know, shake your hands out or something. It's a distraction, not so much of a distraction, but you're almost saying to your body, it's okay, there's the rest of us that will support you in this moment and we will work through it. So I think kind of talking to your body can be really helpful.
I love that.
When you look back now at that race where you dropped out, do you just see a huge difference? If you went back there now, there are just so many things you would implement where there would be a completely different outcome to that race. Has it ever happened again?
I love it's almost like you go, if I'm using my Lara Croft belt, I can work through stuff quite quicker now and find out what's going to work in that moment, because we said each race is different. I think I would probably be that point in the race that I did drop. There was a big climb out of it, and then there's an opportunity where you could really turn the race around, and I know that now as well. So I'd be I'd be curious to see what I could do with that, with the mental toughness that I now have. But then that's not to say, like, I was in a race, and I decided that I was talking to my crew at the time, and I was like, do you know what, I think 90. So it was a 240-mile race, and I said to my crew, I said, I think 93 miles is a good place to drop. And they were like, yeah, Kaz, okay, that's great. You just, crack on. We'll see you at, the next aid station. And I got to the next station and said, I think 110, basically just the gaps. And I just kept, and I was quickly realising that I was just trying to bargain with myself to get me to the next point. And I get there, and I don't know the comparison with perhaps the road running, but in ultras, you're so desperate to reach an aid station to get your food or whatever it is. But then the minute you arrive, you desperately want to leave because you want to keep moving and go to the next one. So it's kind of like I'd reached a point where I was like, I'm going to finish this race now, aren't I? Yes, you're going to finish this race. And it's the conversations I was having with myself. But at the time, I allowed myself to say, if you get to it, you could drop if you wanted to. And of course, I'd get there and I didn't want to.
I think that's so interesting. I think it's really reassuring to hear that you still have those sorts of conversations with yourself, even though obviously you're so knowledgeable about the psychology of it and you train your mind, but you still have those struggles. So I think that's very comforting to hear.
Good. The very my lowest level tool, if it reaches this point, I'm probably know I'm in trouble, but it's just counting. That is the most simple form. If I can't make myself giggle, if I can't sing a song out loud, if my mantra isn't working, I just go to counting, and that saved me more than anything. So, because we can't, you've probably heard this, but we can't think of two things at once. We can do two things at once. We can drive and listen to the radio. We can eat and walk, two things at once. We can't have two thoughts at the same time. So what you want to do is when you have that negative spiral, when you're really throwing your toys at the pram, it's it's trying to distract your brain, and counting is so, it's why the military count when they march, because if people were allowed to think of other things, you'd have people walking off in all sorts of different directions. So by keeping that rhythm, it's a great way of just distracting our brains.
That's so interesting.
Thank you so much for sharing so many tips. I feel like we could go on for ages. I just find this topic so fascinating because I think there are endless things that you can learn about the mind and tools you can use to just help yourself perform better. But our final question that we ask all our guests is, what is your high five me moment? So that moment that you'd give yourself a high five.
I think it was probably that race where I know for sure that, well, I felt for sure that I was going to be quitting that race. The one that I said I would, at 93 miles, I decided that was going to be my cutoff, because I think it was the biggest battle I had. And I probably wasn't so I was running with the lead girl for a short while, and bless her, she must have gone, I just can't wait to drop Kaz. Just get rid of her, because I was like, aren't you finding this really hard? It's like, blah, blah, blah. It was like we were in Moab. We had this beautiful, kind of sunset, and we were just, and I was like, and we knew that snow was forecast as well, which is crazy going into the night. And I said, and we've got snow to deal with, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I'm the worst person right now. She doesn't want to listen to me. And so I had this. It was the first time I had a real battle, and what turned me around, and honestly, I'd gone into an aid station and there was a medic there, and he's become a really good friend, and he's a paramedic as well, and he'd come off, so he volunteers at the weekend at Ultras, and he works as a paramedic, and I was moaning, properly having a good old moan. My feet, this race is rubbish, blah, 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 blah. And he said, do you want me to tell you a story? So he shared his day, and he said, do you know what, I think you need to just go out with gratitude and thank. And this became so I changed my mantra mid-race. He said, be grateful to Mother Earth and Father Air. So for the rest of that race, I just kept on repeating, I'm so grateful to Mother Earth and Father Air that I get to do this. And that's how I finished my race. So I think that would be my high five moment.
Definitely deserves a high five.
I love that mantra as well. I am going to take that with me, and what a way to
beautiful.
What a thing to leave on, because I think so many people will be able to relate to that, and just such a positive mantra to take away. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you guys.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for joining us for 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.